com, and we are back for another edition at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday. Hope you stay tuned for the next hour because we're going to be saying a few more things than to add to what we were saying last week. Didn't have enough time, and time is always against us here at the studio because there's a lot to say and not enough time to say it. But we are back, and hope you will do what you always do. You seem like you stay to the end of the program, then you curse, then you curse us out. Okay, so we're happy to be here, and we are just elated that you'll join us. It's really an honor when I think about it in terms of you joining us at 2 o'clock because we know how precious time is. And time is the only thing that they're not making more of. The same amount of time tomorrow as we have the day, and 24 hours makes up the day, and 365 days make up the year, and there's not an additional time that we can add to it. You have the 1/4 day that they will take up and make use of every 4 years, and so there's not time that's given. It's time that is in fact to be placed at a future point. And over the course of 4 years, an additional day is made, and they will in fact take that out of the equation of the time we have. But nobody's adding any time. You have so much time here, and you better make the most of it. You know, do what they said. I watched this movie called The Titanic, and they were saying that and one of the great movies has been made. Jack was saying to these upstarts, these people that had the nose up in the air, and he was saying. Time he's making most of the time that he has, and here were all these upstarts, and they were looking at this guy. He's one of the paupers on on the Titanic. He's up there in the place he's not supposed to be on that ship because that ship where he was for the multimillionaires. He's up there mixing arms with them and wits with them, showing he's more witted than they are. And so, anyways, it's about time. And he was saying, time to make the most of it, and they drank to that appellation, and that's the way that goes. So we have so much time, and we have an hour here, and we're gonna try to make the most of it. We're gonna get right to our topic. We're labeling this topic today based upon a discussion that went on at what turned into the Constitutional Convention. And this discussion would have begun on the 1st of June, 1787. Don't forget the date they're saying it started at officially was May the 25th. I think this is I'm quoting from the book written by a real scholar of the Constitutional Convention, and you never hear him on TV. You never hear him being proclaimed or being brought on some of these television shows. I've never seen him on television. And I'm talking about Ralph Ketchum, who is the editor of the Anti-Federalist Papers. Now, the Anti-Federalist Papers are those that were writing against what they were endorsing at the Constitutional Convention, and that would be these are the alternate voices that you're going to hear in this book, and I suggest you read it. I was saying to somebody the other day. I was saying, you go through all these universities to get these degrees, and I never was invited to read. I read because I wasn't even invited to read the Federalist Papers. I had read it on my own. But I had never come in contact until much more recent, after all the degrees that you get. It's only 3 of them, and they're 360 degrees altogether. So that's even in 3 degrees you get partial training. There are 357 degrees that's missing out of the that's missing out of the universities. I mean, there's a circle, right? In terms of 360 degrees in the circle. If you got 3 degrees there, that's like how much of that pie chart is that? And so it's not. Don't get too impressed now, because somebody has 3 degrees, because there's 357 degrees that they don't have. And don't forget also something else that Dr. Ben Yakinen said to me some time ago. He said, don't forget the first person that passed out a degree did not have one of his own. And so degrees are important. Get the paperwork in order to be able to get the entry into places that other persons cannot go because they don't have the degrees. But don't get too carried away with it now because the knowledge even at that level is limited. I want to bring into the conversation that we were having last week. And some of you called me about the discussion. I appreciate it. 2 or 3 of you called and said that the discussion we had last week was, what does that mean when you don't call? When you don't call, it means what? We struck out? But I got 2 or 3 phone calls, private phone calls last week after the show was over. And some of you were saying that we had touched a couple of areas that were kind of stunning. And I know the areas you're talking about. But I'm going to touch on that again to some extent, and enlarge on what we were saying last week about that. We were talking about the impeachment process, and I wanted to. I will extend a couple of points beyond where we went with that topic last week. But I want to start out with something else. I want to start out with what Ralph Ketchum is saying on the debate on executive power. Now, what I've said before. Having read James Madison's notes, is I could tell by reading James Madison's notes about what was happening at what turned into, was not intended to be, but turned into a constitutional convention. I could tell in reading James Madison's notes, the great James Madison's notes, that as they got to putting to bed the establishment of Article 2 that establishes the executive branch of government, you could tell that what was happening in that room, that as they were talking about the executive, they were not sure how they wanted to situate it and establish and set it up, but they were very much aware that they did not want a duplication of what they had come out of in 1776, where you have this strong monarchical figure that singularly was in power. The king was the last word, and they did not want to go back to that kind of a model because they saw the abuses of it and had witnessed it through their own claims that they were making against that monarchical structure. They didn't want to have that again. And we are very lucky to have had George Washington come along as along came Jones, and that was in personage of George Washington came along, and he did not covet being the king. And that was to the advantage of the United States because we did not need to go back and replicate that. We had fought 7 years against it. And so, but you could tell by reading James Madison's notes that they were saying, they were trying to put together how they're going to establish the executive branch of government. And the argument was whether or not there should be multifaceted in terms of a number of figures so that in the executive branch, they would do by getting rid of the unicameral government that was established by the Articles, and they had gotten past the problem of that by creating a check and balance inside of the congressional body they set up in Article 1, and that was to have a bicameral Congress where you could have 2 houses, and then you could have a amount of restraint placed in the bodies of the 2 houses of the Congress and have a check and balance system according itself into that structure of government as well. The unicameral congressional body on the executive branch of government did not do that, and so then in their wisdom, I'm tempted to say infinite, but no wisdom is infinite. So in their wisdom, and there was tremendous wisdom in that room by the greatest intellectuals this country has produced, and they saw the need to dichotomize that power in the legislative branch. Now we're coming to the executive branch. And the question is, how are we going to situate the power of the executive? Don't forget now they had dispersed it from the unicameral aspect to the bicameral in the legislative branch in Article 1. Now we come to Article 2 trying to figure out how we're going to do that particular branch. And always the eyes were on the power. How will we restrain it? They were almost, I don't want to use the word fanatical, but I can't think of a better word at this point to use. They were almost fanatics when it came down. They were so bothersome about power going out of control that everything that they did was kind of like with the idea of restraining power. They didn't want power to go out of control. And so now coming to Article 2, and they wanted to they were thinking about how to set up the executive branch of government. And I can see by the notes that Madison wrote that they kept talking about it, and there was a certain amount of discomfort in that room. You could tell that by reading it, because as I visualized what was going on in that room from what Madison wrote, I visualized that what they were doing in talking about the executive branch of government, they kept talking about it, and then when they would say something, this is my imagination now. It's not just this is not the Temptations. It's just my imagination. I'm imagining it based upon what James Madison wrote. But I'm imagining as they would say something, they kept thinking, they're kind of going off and looking up there at Washington and coming back to the discussion, and then looking back at the chair up there and coming back to discussion again. And here's how it was situated. And I think Ralph Ketchum does a good job of capturing that debate. I want to read some of what he says here. In his editing of the book called The Anti-Federalist Papers. We've gone over a lot of the Federalist Papers. We have not talked a lot about the Anti-Federalist Papers. Those who wrote against what was going on in that room, that they convened, where 55 of the delegates would eventually go there and not stay. Some of them would leave, and only 42 of them are left at the end. Not all 55 showed up at the same time. They're showing up at different time periods. Don't forget they're going horse and buggy here, and also going through the mud on rainy days and things of that sort. So when it rained, that would have slowed some of them down, and then some of them didn't. Some did not even send delegates. Rhode Island did not even send delegates. Only 12 states would have participated in the what came into the Constitutional Convention. And so different things are happening, and different interests are being represented here. But here's the debate on the executive power. I think Ralph Ketchum does a brilliant job in setting up what was going on here. Here's what he says, his intro to what was taking place. The convention next, and when he says next, he's saying after they had done Article 1, the legislative branch being set up. The convention next considered the clause providing for a national executive. Since the Articles of Confederation, don't forget the 13 articles that had been the governing body of documents, 13 of them, from 1781 to 1786. Since the Articles of Confederation had not provided for executive power, the executive power and the legislative power being one and the same. Since the Articles of Confederation under that arrangement had not provided for executive power, and since revolutionary hostility to the executive power of the British monarchy remained strong, members were unusually hesitant about fashioning such an unprecedented and potentially oppressive office. To set up the executive branch all by itself was a cause for nervousness in that room. And so Ralph Ketchum sets up brilliantly what you can pick up in reading James Madison's notes. I mean, if you read the notes, you can see, I mean, that this is clear. I'm not sitting in that room, obviously, by the time restraints. I don't have a time machine. I'm not sitting in that room. Don't make the claim of sitting in that room. But I'm in that room in a sense because I can see the fidgeting that was taking place by what James Madison wrote. So that in a peripheral way and viscerally, I'm in that room. I see myself in that room because I have read the 85 Federalist Papers, and I read Madison's notes and some of the notes written by Yates from New York. Yates is one of the three delegates that went there from New York. Not two of the only one left from New York at the end was Alexander Hamilton. And I said earlier that of the 55 that will show up in Philadelphia, at the end, only 42 of them were there at the very end. And 3 of the ones that were there, the 42 did not sign the document because they disagreed with the result. So I like what you did, Ralph Ketchum. If you watch this program or listen to anything we say here, and some of you guys that are listening to what we say here, but you're not coming out in the woodwork, I know that I could tell from what I watch. I watch your programs because I'm interested in this period of history, and I watch it and I listen to what you say, and so I know for a fact that some of you, and I can name some of you, are watching this program. Ralph Ketchum says this. Now he's reporting what happened on the June 1st, with the deliberation starting on May 25th. And here's what he says here. He's quoting what's going on. He's editing it, but he's quoting what goes on here. This is from Madison's notes. Mr. Pinckney was for a vigorous executive, but was afraid the executive powers of the existing Congress might extend to peace and war and so forth, and which would render the executive a monarchy of the worst kind, to wit, an elective one. And nothing could be more oppressive than an elective monarchy. It could be more out of control than King George III. Why would that be the case? Because this person has the endorsement in back of him, a majority vote. I mean, look at them now. They think if they get a majority, they can go in and do what they want to do. They think majority vote to put them in there gives them license to go in there and just simply go through a tear on the Constitution, which is what they're doing. Both parties are doing it. So that's what is happening here. Ketchum does a good job in pointing this out. Now, this was Pinckney concerned about the executive office. Now, Wilson, James Wilson, Mr. Wilson moved that the executive consist of a single person. Mr. Pinckney seconded the motion so as to read, quote, that a national executive to consist of a single person be instituted. Now now look at this carefully. They have a concern, as can be seen by the articles. They do not want to have that repeated. That's why the articles read the way it read, and why they combined the executive and the legislative together into one body, thinking to restrain it that way. Now they are deciding, given that didn't work out too well, the 6 year time period in which that was in fact the law of the land under that particular arrangement, that did not work out too well, because by doing that, they simply shut down the power completely unless there was unanimity in allowing it to act. See, another point to be made, don't forget, the Constitution, this is a point made by Thomas Woods. The Constitution allows the government to act, but spells out in what the terms of his actions are. You see, the people don't have to have any license to act. Why? Because of their sovereignty, which they did not surrender to the government in terms of creating the government. Is out of the sovereignty of the people, they are able to act on their own, providing that they do not act in contradiction to the person who are acting in their name based upon the sovereignty that they delegated away from themselves. Isn't that true? I'm trying to tell you, scholar, something. You don't have it. You can claim, see, look, I know you watch this program, but I'll tell you something. You're not qualified to come against this. And that's why y'all remain quiet. You should remain quiet. Mr. Wilson moved that the executive consist of a single person. I can see that they're looking at that chair. They're now comfortable, wherein before that, Washington wasn't sitting there in 1781. You know where Washington was? Out there fighting. And then after the fight was over, 2 years after the articles were set up, Washington is getting on his horse. It wasn't Trigger, and it wasn't Silver, but getting on his horse and going back to Mount Vernon. And he's now sitting in that convention. And they've been sitting there for a number of days in that convention from May 25th to June 1st, and they get more and more comfortable with something they were not comfortable at when they set up the articles. And now they're having this conversation. Listen to Pinckney and listen to James Wilson. Wilson moved that the executive consists of a single person. And Mr. C. Pinckney, Charles Pinckney, seconded the motion so as to read that, quote, a national executive to consist of a single person be instituted. They're looking at that chair. I'm not in that room. I'm in those notes. They're looking at that chair. A considerable pause, listen to this part now. A considerable pause ensuing, because they're in a gasp in that, because they know they all came there with the idea that they got to stop this encroachment if there's a person as powerful as the king was. So they all went there with that particular idea. But there's something going on in that room. You can tell something going on in that room. A considerable pause ensuing, and the chairman asking if he should put the question. Dr. Franklin, Benjamin Franklin, observed that it was a point of great importance and wished that the gentlemen Wilson and Pinckney, would deliver their sentiments on it before the question was put. They want to hear their argument about why it should be an individual and not a committee. Mr. Rutledge, who will later on be the second and the fourth, the second and the we're talking about Chief Justice here. The second and the came back to fill a void in the absence of the Congress in recession, and Rutledge comes back for an interim period and wasn't endorsed the second time around as a Chief Justice, which drove Rutledge to trying to commit suicide, by the way, and was jumped into the river, being rejected. I don't think he could stand rejection too much. But Rutledge, who would later on become the Chief Justice after John Jay, Mr. Rutledge animated, let me get this right, averted on the shyness of gentlemen on this and other subjects. Shyness, he calls it. He said it looked as if they supposed themselves precluded by having frankly disclosed their opinions from afterwards changing them. Yeah, they went there with the idea of not having a one single person. But they were doing it this way, folks. They were talking about a committee, and they said, and it should be a committee, and it's like they're wandering off over here, and shouldn't be a single person, and like that. That's what's going on in that room. That's what he said. So Rutledge is saying, it sounds like to me you all are changing your mind. So Mr. Rutledge animadverted on the shyness of gentlemen on this and other subjects. He said it looked as if they supposed themselves precluded by having frankly disclosed their opinion from afterwards changing them, which he did not take to be at all the case. Rutledge, he was for vesting the executive power in a single person, though he was not for giving him the power of war and peace. War and peace. There's the person in that room 4 years after setting down the British. Now a civilian. And the question now is whether or not to put in the hands of no longer a civilian, but a president of the United States, executive, put the power of the Army and the Navy, didn't have an Air Force, and barely had a Marine Corps until the Barbary pirates' actions demanded it. And off we go into the halls of Montezuma and to the shores of Tripoli. That's what that's about. So now they're talking about an executive. Rutledge talking. He said he was for vesting the executive power in a single person, though he was not for giving him the power of war and peace. War and peace. It's like they're going off. A single man would feel the greatest responsibility and administer the public affairs best. But war and peace and putting that power in the hands of that single individual, that was bothersome. Mr. Sherman said he considered the executive magistracy as nothing more than an institution for carrying the will of the legislature into effect. That the person or persons ought to be appointed by and accountable to the legislature only, which was the depository of the supreme will of the society. That's what they're discussing. As they were the best judges of the business which ought to be done by the executive department as a carrier of the water of the legislative branch of government, and consequently of the number necessary from time to time for doing it. He wished the number might not be fixed, but that the legislature should be at liberty to appoint one or more as experience might dictate. A single person or a committee to be in the executive branch of government. Mr. Wilson preferred a single magistrate as giving most energy, dispatch, and responsibility to the office. He did not consider the prerogatives of the British monarchy as a proper guide, listen to this part, in defining the executive powers. Not to be so overwhelmed by the fear of the power going out of control as to have that as the determining factor, the fear driving the process. And fear is what they use to drive us into giving up our liberty today. Just tell them that coronavirus is killing everybody, and then you can then go after and take away their liberty. That's what's going on. He's saying, don't let this fear drive you into making ill decisions. He wished the number might not be fixed, but that the legislature should be at liberty to appoint one or more as experience might dictate. Mr. Wilson preferred a single magistrate as giving most energy, dispatch, and responsibility to the office. He would avoid confusion for one thing. He did not consider the prerogatives of the British monarch as a proper guide in defining the executive powers. Some of these prerogatives were of a legislative nature, among others that of war and peace and so forth and so forth. Now go back and read Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the Constitution, where that part of the Constitution says that the Congress, because that's what it does in Article 1, sets up the legislative body. So it says the Congress shall have the power to declare war, put it in the power of the Congress. That's where it was, in fact, delegated. We have not had a declared war, folks, in this country since 1941. And that's when Roosevelt, knowing he would get it, went there after Pearl Harbor had been bombed on December the 7th, 1941, and went to Congress the next day on December the 8th and asked for a declaration of war against Japan. And knowing he's going to get it, because who's going to allow themselves to be voted against declaring war against a country that attacked the United States? Off the shore of the contiguous 48, well, it wasn't 40 at that time, it was 36, but of the contiguous states, they've attacked Pearl Harbor, and Roosevelt, assured of the end result, went there and asked for a declaration of war against Japan on December the 8th and got it. Mr. Wilson preferred a single magistrate, giving most energy, dispatch, and responsibility to the office. He did not consider the prerogatives of the British monarch as a proper guide in defining the executive powers. Some of these prerogatives were of a legislative nature, among others that of war and peace, and so forth and so forth. The only powers he conceived strictly executive were those of the executive laws and appointing officers not appertaining to and appointed by the legislature. So the executive branch was seen as specific to the terms of the executive branch was the law enforcing branch of the government, carrying out the orders made by the lawmaking branch of government. Mr. Gerry of Massachusetts, out of which you get the term gerrymandering. Mr. Gerry favored the policy of annexing a council to the executive in order to give weight and, listen to this part here, and inspire confidence. But they over there looking at that chair. That's gonna win out. What's in that chair is gonna win out. Mr. Randolph strenuously opposed a unity in the executive magistracy. He regarded it as the fetus of monarchy. The baby. In other words, give it to an executive singly in the place of an executive office holder, and that's the incubator through which the baby will give birth to the tyranny. We had, he said, no motive to be governed by the British government as our prototype. He did not mean, however, to throw censure on that excellent fabric. He did not mean to cast aspersions on Washington. That's what they're saying there. That's what Madison is saying. If we were in a situation to copy it, he did not know that he should be opposed to it. But the fixed genius of the people of America required a different form of government. He could not see why the great requisites for the executive department, vigor, dispatch, and responsibility, could not be found in 3 men as well as in 1 man. The executive ought to be independent. It ought, therefore, in order to support its independence, to consist of more than 1 person that could be inside of the executive branch making decisions that were unto that branch as the law enforcement body of the government. Mr. Wilson said that unity in the executive, instead of being the fetus of monarchy, would be the best safeguard against tyranny. He repeated that he was not governed by the British model, which was inapplicable to the situation in this country, the extent of which was so great and the manners so Republican that nothing but a great confederated republic would do for it. That is unbelievable in what's going on in that convention. And what they are saying is that given the fact that there are 13 polities, each of them a republic. In fact, the Republican form of government is guaranteed in Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, where each state, each republic is what they're saying, is guaranteed. That is the requirement for the coming together to form a more perfect union, to make sure that they are guaranteed their sovereignty, their republicanism. So with that in mind, they are comfortable in terms of it cannot go out of control with a single magistrate because 13 states would stand against it. Let's see, what can I read here to bring into that? Let me read something to you here. I didn't bring it. I have to just tell you where it's located. Go read the Fifth Amendment, where it's talking about the United States, and it's not saying singular. It's speaking as them. Each state being spoken of in the content there. Because the United States is to talk about the collective. But in the collective, there's the individuality of the states. And there are assurances that given the fact that there are so many voices to be considered, that majoritarianism that exists within the collective, but also the individuality of that, will restrain it if it is a single magistrate. Now they're ready for the question, and they are now looking at that chair to make that deciding moment. Now I give you that as a background because I want to, what I really want to talk about is this noise being made. This noise being made in Washington right now. With this, I call them a day in my post. I'm calling them out, by the way. Every post I do from this point forward until November the 5th of next year, I'm going to be calling them out in Washington. They can run, but they're not going to be able to hide. I'm writing against them every day. And I'll be writing an article every day along these lines here as a try to inform the country of what the going rate is, based upon the great things the framers of this country put in place. They did it. And they did it for the people of this country. That's what they're saying in the preamble. You need to read it.
Well, I think most Americans are like totally without understanding of the horrors of existence that led up to our ancestors coming to this country, and and what was going on in Europe at that time and the rest of the world about how things were ruled, how people ruled. And they just don't have an understanding of how brutal and savage and how desperate and hopelessly desperate it was. They don't have a clue of how brutal those rulers could have been.
You're making a point, John. And what do you think is the reason why they're allowing these immigrants to come in here and without going through any of the protocols to understand the grounding points of the nation, the history of the country, and they're letting them come in and will eventually get citizenship. That's on the path to it. We're going out without going through what this country stands for, and what are they doing here? What do you think the intent is?
They're doing it. The both parties actually are complicit in this.
Tell me about it.
And the Democrats want it because they want the vote, and the Republicans want it because now the corporations they are associated with are now happy because they have a cheaper labor source. And that's what it is. And basically, people are coming in here and they're getting all kinds of benefits given to them. And they are. I mean, people say that it doesn't happen. I'm at stores all the time. I see people using bridge cards who can't speak English.
Right.
So even if they're here legally, they're not even here. They're not even trying to learn the language. And they're using our system. They hate us, but they love our benefits.
Right.
And another thing, I mean,
John, you're hitting the nail on the head.
yeah, that's what it is. I mean, and the thing is, I mean, I've told this before. When the blacks realized they're being shortchanged, they've been here, they had to suffer through the movements and changes and stuff, and push for their rights and fight for their rights. And now they're getting people who are coming from other countries just waltz in, and they're now competitors for their job, the very few jobs that might be available, because we've lost the manufacturing-based jobs, which paid handsomely well. We've lost that. That's offshore.
Yeah.
And so both parties allow people to make stuff offshore, bring it in here, and sell it to our people without tariffs or the question of tariffs. I mean, and some people on the libertarian side will say, well, tariffs are bad. Well, guess what? That's how the Constitution was set up to raise money for the United States, was through tariffs.
That's right.
And taxation for imported goods. I mean, you don't like it, shouldn't take it up, but I mean, Well, nowadays they come in here and they're trying they're trying to. Biden's got a plan, I guess, to tax people's retirement funds up to 40%. I mean, after you've been taxed all the years you've been trying to acquire that wealth, that little wealth, so you could retire,
Yeah.
they want to take that from you.
Yeah, that John, you're hitting a lot of nails on the head. This is a deliberate attempt to change everything that was put in place by the framers of the country, and the people are not aware of what was put in place on their behalf, because they're not even teaching, and they're not even teaching this, and they're not even teaching history anymore in the schools, because they don't want this to be known, because they're taking away the people's ability to fight. They don't even know what they be fighting for. I'm not talking about go out there and just helter skelter be fighting, but to have some grounding point of what needs to be preserved and what needs to be conserved. We need to conserve some things in this country. And if you notice nothing is being conserved, have you noticed this? All the movement is in a single direction, to deconstruct the country, tearing down the statues, putting things that are symbols of what the country's history has been in museums and hiding it away from the people where they won't know it ever existed. I'm talking including the Confederate flag and all those statues of those persons that stood up against the tyranny of the federal government during what is called a Civil War. You tell me how there's a Civil War and people are fighting for independence from the system. How is that a Civil War? It's a war of independence in the name of the framers. That's what they were fighting for, and we need to stop calling them something that they were not. Something they were not doing. This idea of fighting over slavery. The war was not over slavery. It was over the fact that their fathers had fought for independence. They were fighting for independence in the name of their fathers, and they were not going to be allowed, because the person standing in the gap in this case here was Abraham Lincoln. That was standing there as George III. That's what they're trying to move that out of the way. And what they did there, I'm going to just tell you what's going on here, and that is they put him at the top of the food chain and made him greater than Washington. There's no president you can put above Washington, and anyone that does that does not have the best interest of the country at heart.
But anyway, see, what a lot of people lack the understanding, it's an accepted thing that George Washington was the president, the first president. Okay,
Yeah.
But what it is they don't realize when this man was fighting for this, he had no way of knowing the outcome of his struggle. He could have been very easily captured by the British, taken back to England and hung, or drawn and quartered. That's what they did to people who stood up to the kings back then. So I mean, he put himself on the line. All those people did. They don't understand the brutality these people would go through if they were caught.
We don't understand that today, John, but they understood it. That's why they're saying we pledge our lives, folks, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. It took that to weld them into commitment, because they knew there was no turning back. And Franklin told them this. He said that we must all hang together, because if we don't, certainly we will all hang separately. They knew what was at stake. And I have to honor that and respect it. And I get emotional about it, quite frankly, because I know that this experiment could have fallen through if they had not had those persons at the switch. What we have is a switch right now. I'm going to say this. I have to say it because it's true. And I call them in my article today in part 2. I mean every word of it. I'll let you go and read the article. Or what I titled part 2. I mean every word of that title. I'm not playing any games here. It's too serious.
There is hope, though, because there's a woman that works at a grocery store down the street from here. She's from Cuba. And I was talking to her last week, and she was saying about she was commenting about what's going on with the government now and leaning towards socialism. They're moving towards socialism, and it doesn't work. And I've seen it. You know, I don't know how old the woman is, but she's obviously been around. She still has an accent, speaks English very well though. But she thinks we're moving closer to that, and they will. It never works. It never does what it says it's going to. And she goes, and her family's. I guess she still has family there. So I'm glad I don't remember her name right now because I mean I don't want to. But anyway, she's just horrified at the direction this country's
I am
taking.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that there are those that were fleeing tyranny, as that lady was doing down in Michigan. By the way, the one that was that you remember that one woman that had had the business, and they were Whitman was trying. Our governor, the governor, was trying to shut her business down because of the COVID, the so-called COVID threat.
Whitmer is the personification of white privilege because her father, she grew up in more than a silver. She grew up with a platinum spoon in her mouth. Her dad was the president of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. God knows how much money that family has. She's never worked a day in her life. Her husband's a physician and a surgeon who could just walk away from whatever job he wanted to do because he's got enough money saved up. So these people are the personification, the embodiment of what they rail against the rest of us are supposed to be like. They represent it more than, hands down, and yet she didn't care about. They didn't care.
No.
They didn't care the devastation they wrought. They didn't care.
And this lady was just trying. She had come from one of those regimes as an immigrant, had set up a business in I think Detroit, was it, or Lansing? Detroit, I believe it was, and they were determined that she was not going to operate when they told these businesses to close down. And as she was going around the corner waiting for her, as she was going to her job, they put her under arrest and shut her business down. It was a travesty because people were trying to pay their bills, and she's trying to keep her employers working so they could in fact do that. And you have these monarchs doing what they did under the cover of COVID, trying to pretend that they believe the stuff they were telling us. That and which really we can calm down and now look at how ridiculous it was. A virus escaping out of a lab in China, and we can't go outside in Michigan. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, and Whitmer was photographed and video recorded time and time again. No mask at bars, meeting up with all her cronies. Fauci was showing without a mask. Everybody, they broke all the rules that they expected, and that's the elite for you. That's what they always been.
They never followed the protocol they were putting off on us, we the people, because they don't respect we the people. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. That's what they're saying in that room. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. And that's what they were doing. That's what that room was about. They're trying to do that not only for themselves, they're trying to do that for the ones that will come after them, to put something in place that would serve in perpetuity. To do what? To restrain power so that the fruits of what they would put in place would not only benefit that generation, but every generation that will come thereafter. An understanding that every generation has the responsibility of ensuring that for the generation that comes afterwards. That's how it works. A tumbling effect. It's done in the time of the framers, and those that follow them are to continue the efforts to refine it through things that were not in their purview that can be done because the Constitution provides for amendments to it, to be amended as you see fit to continue the experiment and continue the efforts of the framers, but not to use it to amend it so it that it undoes, yeah, that it undoes what the framers did. I was trying to get my verb correct there because I never want to misrepresent Mrs. Reed. But you cannot go back and amend it so that the document stops existing as it was in fact put in place by the framers. They don't understand that. But you cannot amend the document, folks, so that its purpose for existing ceased to be that purpose. I'm singly saying that, but they're not able to come behind me and say anything different. I'm telling you scholars that. I'm saying this in your face. I'm not the choir. I've been on this trail a long time before I got my degrees. All the degrees did for me, quite frankly, was validate not everything, but some of it along the line, along the road, long road, because it was 21 years between my bachelor's and my PhD. It was 21 years ago. I was not rushing to the degree. I was trying to get the information. I really wasn't. I wasn't really too much. I wish I could have done. I should have done this much sooner than I did. That's what I'm saying. But I did helter skelter kind of stuff because I just wanted knowledge, and I thought I was in the final door. I saw myself as a public school employee the rest of my life because I enjoyed what I was doing. I felt I was married. I was really kind of married to my job. That's where I saw my position. And so I just wanted the knowledge to go in there and be able to impart knowledge was the idea. But then I got a little bit, after I started doing part-time, I didn't realize I had to do something to move to the next level. So I did 87 and 89. But I will tell you this. I want to tell these scholars this, that I listened to you very carefully, and I have finally understood your training a lot better than I did. I used to get excoriate for what I was hearing you say, because I knew my training was not secondary to anyone that's out there, and I just disagreed with some of the things you were saying because I knew what you were saying was not true. But I now can understand why you were saying it. I said today in my article, as a matter of fact, that you're trained in the law. You're not trained in the Constitution. I can understand that now, so I can now appreciate a lot more of your training, but you're not in this area here. And I can tell you that because I am in this area, and I'm well trained in it. But the training is not just that at the university level either. It's a lot of it coming out of things that I was doing a long time before I even got to the university. Some of it done, believe it or not, didn't understand all of it. Had a lot of, what the university did for me was put the pieces into the puzzle that it was pretty much completed before I got there to the last level, but putting pieces together for me that helped me to understand it better than I did. But I understood it fairly well before arriving there. But now I think there's some there now. And I don't think anyone that's out here can teach me anything about it, quite frankly. Now you may say that's braggadocious. Well, I have to tell you this. They thought Terrence Crawford was bragging until 2 weeks ago. Oh, he's just fighting bombs. They're putting bombs in the room in the ring with him. He's not fighting anybody. until they put the one in the ring with him that was saying that about him, and that was their superstar, Errol Spence. And then when he was saying, well, you ain't fought nobody. And then 2 weeks ago, they put him in the ring with Terrence Crawford from all places, Omaha, which hasn't produced a champion, a boxing champion. So what did he know? And then at the T-Mobile Center in Las Vegas, they put him in the ring together, and the guy that hadn't fought anybody was in the ring with him, that had fought everyone and had all the resume, and got in the ring with him. And after the second round, it went into the ninth round. After the second round, it was over. You ought to play those. You may not be boxing fans, but I look at boxing as part of how life operates. Merit should operate, as a matter of fact, but doesn't always operate this way because we have the government getting involved in it and suspending merit and putting something in place of merit, which is another abomination of what government does. But merit plays out in boxing because there's no hiding place. You either got it or you don't have it. And 2 weeks ago, you boxing fans know what I'm talking about, is that the fighter of our time, Terrence Crawford, put his money where his mouth had been and bet it on himself and went in that ring and clocked Errol Spence, the one that had all the answers and so on, and found he didn't have any of them. I'm claiming that space in this area right here. I don't think there's anybody out there, quite frankly, that can teach me anything about the Constitution. And you scholars can say what you want to, but I dare you to say it in public. You don't say anything in public, but I can tell by what you're saying in public and things you're not saying in public. I'll tell you right now, Lawrence Tribe's never going to say it again. What do you say it about? You're not going to say that again, Lawrence Tribe. You're not going to say again that impeachment is not taking place until the matter is referred to the Senate. There's nothing to refer to the Senate if it hasn't taken place, because unless you've impeached, there's no matter to take to the Senate. But I will tell you this, all you scholars, every time there's been an impeachment, it's been taken to the Senate, but there's nothing in the Constitution that mandates it. Go ahead and read it for yourself and see. Show it to me if you can find it. Nothing there that allows you that mandates. You're allowed to do it, but not mandated. I'll make this point here and then I'll get off the air. I said something that was very shocking last week and also in my article, no doubt, that there's no violation in terms of the impeachment of Donald Trump, the two impeachments. There was no violation in the impeachment. It was inappropriate to do it in terms of the claims being made, but they can make the claim, because impeachment is nothing other than an accusation, and there's no standard in the Constitution for impeachment. Listen carefully, you scholars. There's nothing in the document that sets up a standard for impeachment. The standard only has one part in it, and that is the majority vote in the House. There's no other standards for impeachment. Because you can make the claim, you have the right to make the claim. But if it's referred to trial, that's when the standard isn't set. That's the difference between impeachment and the trial, Lawrence Tribe. The impeachment is the accusation of the wrongdoing. The trial is based upon that, and the particularities of it is that you must have the claim in the House of the impeachment that warrants removal, and that's what the trial is about. But you don't have to have the trial because it doesn't have to necessarily be about removal. It can just be about informing the president that the constituencies that are there in the people's body are making a claim about what you're doing is unconscionable and unacceptable. And then the trial would be, if it needs to be a trial, if it needs to be a trial now, but it doesn't necessarily have to come to a trial. You scholars understand that. And if you do, then we can begin to get some of the house in order, because we got to get this house in order, and you can only do that by, first of all, going back to the Constitution, but we have to understand what the document requires. And I'm going to pick it up at that point next week. We're not through with this topic yet. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.